Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Michele Masucci. We are at ABF Stockholm, the Workers' Educational Association, and this is the third event in a series that precedes the exhibition A Careful Strike here at Mint Konsthall. This event will takes its departure in Belarus, and events that started in August this year in the heat of the moment. Is everyone hearing me correctly? I just want to make a final check for sound and voice. Everyone hears me? Yes. So the exhibition A Careful Strikes, that lends its name title from Precarias a la Deriva, militant feminist collective in Spain, departs from the painting by Ruben Nilsson, The History of the Workers' Movement, that you see in this room here. This painting that depicts different parts of the workers' movement's history, conceived by Ruben Nilsson, who was a plate metal worker, and painted the painting in 1940s. Will be activated through different conversations and artworks in the opening that starts on the 3rd of December. As you can see in this painting, at the top you have a big assembly of workers and people mobilizing to change their working conditions. And of course, the history of the workers' movement also poses questions to our present contemporary situation. So in this series of conversations that the exhibition that precede the exhibition, we have activated different issues that concern the contemporary, but that also connect with a continuum back into the history of the workers' movement and the history of movements in general, so not only the workers' movement. This is the third of this series of conversations, and I'm very happy to be here together with Problem Collective and Alexei Borsyanok, who will together with me moderate this evening, together with Anna Bredava, from a queer activist and organizer of DOTYK Queer Festival, Olya Sosnovskaya, artist and researcher and member of Problem Collective, together with Alexei, Nikolai Spetsiev, sorry for the pronunciation, artist and computer scientist, member of EEFFF group and Work Hard, Play Hard working group, and Andrei Karpeka, activist and co-founder of Minsk Urban Platform. So this event is a rather long event, so bear with us. We have water and fruit in the room. You're free to take that if you feel dehydrated. We will start with the individual presentation by Alexei of the present situation and the recent history in Belarus. Then we will have individual presentations by our guests, about 5-6 minutes. And you will then have the opportunity to ask questions. I will also include questions from the live feed on Facebook. We will have a short break after that, and then we will dwell more into detail on the conditions of the Belarusian strikes and how it connects both to activists and cultural activities in different ways. The event is co-moderated by me and Alexei, who is more in tune with the situation in Belarus. And you are all actually in Minsk, if I'm correct? No. So please, when you do your presentations, you can also say where you are located, so so we know from where you are speaking. Without further ado, I will then invite Alexei to start with the presentation of the recent history and events in Belarus. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I hope you hear me well. And first of all, I would like to thank Michele, to thank Ashwin and Emily from Mint and ABF as well, and also everyone who participates and agree to participate in the discussion, and everyone who joins us this evening. Thank you so much for this attention, which is extremely needed now. I think that and I would like to start perhaps saying that Problem Collective participates in the exhibition, which will be opening in December. And together with Olya Sosnovskaya, Vladimir Hamovich, and Alessia Zhitkevich, we were kindly invited. And this time I took this possibility to moderate this event, to help Michele to moderate it. And I'm also gladly using this opportunity to see all of you to one more time, and to have this possibility to discuss your ideas, your perspectives, your comments, your reports from the side, from Belarus, but also from the abroad. This very specific and interesting constellation of what is happening exactly now. When we were talking with Michele, actually quite recently, around 1 month ago, we were saying that it would be interesting to do this conversation into the regards of strike as one of the important forms of protest now, but also to open the discussion up to other extremely important notions, as for example solidarity, self-organizations, and others, which became extremely important for us and for Belarusian protests or Belarusian uprising, as many people call it differently. And back then, 1 month ago, we were saying that yes, we want to have this discussion in the heat of the moment, even though we were not sure at all if the moment will be hot in a month. It is hot, and it is a heat of the moment again now. So, and I was thinking about it today and thinking that actually how long the moment could be to keep warm and hot, and what actually does it mean that this moment was hot for last 2 months, where every day the variety of different protests, struggles, movements, strikes, blockades, protests has happened. What can it tell us about the temporality of what is happening now in Belarus? Can we really speak about one or chain of particular events, or is it some sort of process, etc.? So this partly also questions which I hope we will discuss today. And when we were thinking also around a month ago, I proposed this title, which sounds like tomorrow should not be the same as today, which I wanted to mention because it was a title of one of the anarchist leaflets produced by one of the groups and distributed during protests now. And I thought that actually it's also, back then I thought, and I still think that it also stresses this notion of temporality and change, that actually like how a moment, which kind of events could constitute this moment, the moment of protest, revolutionary moment, or some other specific condensed temporality. And now, just before we started the conversation, we were asking, how are you? And actually, since I'm quite recently in Belarus, I actually can't really tell myself or others how I am, because there are so many things happening at the same time, so many different conditions and so many different temporalities, which my body have, that I think this potentiality connected to the notion of moment is very important, and how not to lose moment. Is moment is losing? Is it staying? Is it hot or is it cold, etc.? So I thought that it might be interesting topic to discuss, and therefore it's very hard to, in this very short amount of time, to really in details present what has actually happened in Belarus and what kind of important events to mention, because this kind of singularity of event provides us different ways of narrating what has happened, different ways of understanding actually, and seeing which kind of reasons led to where we found ourselves now as cultural workers, as workers, as teachers, as citizens, as actually people who've been voting or who've been refusing to vote, who've been supporting different kind of political powers and been part of different political and social constellations. So I decided to focus now mainly on the notion of strike, which I also think worked in a very similar way as this notion of moment I was talking about before, in a way that actually it was something which no one was expecting in the middle of August, that actually many workers and many huge industrial state enterprises would go on strike, or would have something, or like would threat the state to go for strike, or have different more individual forms of workers' protests. So I think no one was expecting something like that happening in such a massive scale since early 90s, which was happening in Belarus only back then. At the same time, this promise was fading out at some point, and people also being critical to workers' movement, that they were not active enough. And it was a whole discussion of how strikes are a relevant tool of political struggles, how it can help, and actually how, and I think many people would agree that it's actually one of the main tools and one of the crucial tools which actually can move the situation to one further, actually to produce this kind of change. So I would like to mention a few things which I think are important, and actually why this notion of strike became so important one more time. And I would start with today, that actually today the worker from Belarus, Kali, whose name is Alexander Kurban. Belarus Kali is one of the biggest potassium producers in the country. Handcuffed, he blocked himself in the mine, in the depths, today, and refused to rise until his demands would be satisfied. And demands are, which actually many Protestants demonstrate, people who are protesting are sharing, is a stop of political violence, resigning of Lukashenko, and new fair elections. And he's not the first one who is doing the same in the mines. Also, this action was done by another workers, by Yuri Korzun and Oleg Kudelka. And this action was preceded a few days ago, on 12th of October. The Coordination Council, which is a political body run by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, issued an ultimatum to Lukashenko to resign, to release political prisoners, and to stop violence, police and state violence on the streets. And this ultimatum, if it will not be satisfied by 25th of October, she and the Coordination Council claims that it will be followed by a nationwide general strike. It will be followed by road blockage and the collapse of state-run enterprises, and boycott of sales and boycott of sales. So basically now what we have as this kind of political horizon at this particular moment, this temporality which is produced, is like 2 calendar weeks where Belarusian state would have to respond or will ignore this ultimatum. And kind of the main argument that if it will not happen would be a general strike. So as far as we can see, it's not only a strike from the workers, which we don't know, or we can discuss. It's an open question if workers would support it or not, because of many different reasons, because of very problematic labor laws in the country, which were actually labor movement was devastated in the beginning of 2000s by infamous Lukashenko introduction of contract system, devastation of independent trade unions, and replacement them with a very repressive system of official trade unions, which were actually not which were not part of the workers' struggles in any possible way since many years, and also bureaucracy, etc., etc. So here I would maybe also mention the that all the things which were happening were perhaps in a very interesting way became more. The protests in Belarus became more than the sum of the reasons why it has happened. So and maybe just to mention few of them, and something which I think is important to mention in this situation is actually the way how COVID-19 played its role, and how it's actually stimulated the variety of solidarity networks, which actually later on in few months transformed into solidarity networks with people who suffered from police violence, people who were fired for different reasons from the state, industrial, but also cultural enterprises because of their political views. Also athletes who are supporting the strikes and protests. So because of the kind of COVID dissidency of Lukashenko, people started to self-organize and to collect big sums of money to support doctors with masks and with other tools of protection, and basically helping people, and also people who were actually suffering from COVID, somehow to survive those times. And Belarus was without any official measures helping against virus whatsoever. So people start accumulate a lot of anger against the state and against the health ministry, which were actually lying a lot to people on the number of deaths, on the numbers of infected, etc. And and I think that those networks became one of the prototypes, or let's say also like test models, in which now people are organizing for the variety of different reasons, both to organize protests, but also to self-organize in their yards, inventing and projecting different models of self-organizations in their yards, in their districts, sometimes with a huge help of technologies, with a huge help of Telegram, with huge help of other applications and digital platforms, where communication could help much more easily. So we decided to open up this conversation with these short statements from all the participants, and we were thinking with Michele to invite people, cultural workers, people connected to different forms of activism, protests, and cultural productions, to give us some perspectives, their ideas, their impressions on what is actually happening in Belarus, and trying to see many ways, many ideas, many forms of organization and protest which are important to Belarus, and actually to broader context of Eastern Europe and broader context of contemporary geopolitics. So I think I will finish here now, but also we will open up many of the things I've mentioned before, and also go to new territories. So let's start with these short presentations, and then after that we can go more into discussion phase.
Thank you, Alexei. I would like also to add to, if we can sort of also think a bit of points of solidarity, points of possibility to connect and reconnect, and not only learn from what is going on in Belarus, but also what can be done from our situation here in Sweden. How can we be in solidarity with your struggles? So we said Anna would start, right?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna. I'm a queer activist in Belarus. Right now, I'm in Minsk, but since the protest started, I've been sharing my time between Minsk and Gomel, another big Belarusian city at the south of Belarus. And I went there to vote because I was born there and I was registered there and I voted there. And then I found out that my vote was taken away there. And then I went to protest there. And then I came back to Minsk, where I live actually, and went to the protest in Minsk as well, and been going to them ever since. I think like emotionally right now, I feel really strange because when you live 2 months, when it's been 2 months since the beginning, you're kind of getting used to everything and you're getting used to living in the revolution, which is a weird thing to say, I guess. And if we are talking about this notion of strike that is like the center of discussion today, I feel a very huge lack of striking now because for over three weeks, I think, I've been feeling this really strong urge to stop. So everything around me stops as well. Just like I just want to wake up one day and the whole Belarus is silent and not moving, and it's not happening, and it hasn't happened yet. And that makes me very sad because it feels like it's the only option to change anything right now, to just stop. And like people are still managing to live their normal life, and it's not a bad thing. Like everyone is saying that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And if we want to change anything, we still need to take care of ourselves and like try to live the normal routine as much as possible. But I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to be living your normal life. Yeah, and it feels really weird. I think I wanted to also like agree with Lasha about the solidarity around the protest. I think the roots of this solidarity started with the COVID crisis and the way that government didn't help at all and ignored every needs and did everything wrong. Everything it could do wrong, it did. So people had to organize, and then politically in the March or April, I think people were organizing as well, and like the government's inaction and ignorance was a big political inciting force that I wouldn't say radicalized, but made more people care about politics than usually. And then there was this solidarity feeling going through all this summer, and when the protests happened, which are the biggest protests in Belarusian history, I think, and which were like one of the questions Lasha prepared for us in advance was what are the most important changes in Belarus so far? And I feel like the most important change was the protest itself, that it managed to organize and be sustainable for 2 months at the scale at which it's currently happening, where thousands and hundreds of thousands of people are coming out to the streets, not just in Minsk, but around the whole country. For example, I was in Gomel, and the protest movement is strong there as well. Yeah, so I think that was the most important change. People are actually not afraid anymore to do something. It feels like, and yeah, it's a miracle, to be honest, that is still going on. At least it feels like a miracle for me. I think I will talk more about like the queer perspective on the protest later. But again, since I started talking about solidarity, there are so many groups involved in this protest. And besides the main proposal or the main request to get rid of the dictatorship of the dictator. I feel like I wouldn't say that there are many more points that are uniting for these groups of people, but I feel like the protest engenders the environment where a lot of points and political positions and political requests can be discussed and are discussed currently. So that's also very important for me. I personally haven't been on strike. I've been working as usual, which I guess makes me a hypocrite when I'm saying that I need strike. But earlier this week, we were discussing with Nikolai and our other friends that we need to embody the revolution in our daily life, like make a revolution a routine of some sort. And we were speaking about the ways to do it. And I wouldn't say that I have figured out the way to do it now, but I'm trying and I'm thinking of the ways how we can make all our daily actions revolutionary at this point, because it feels like it will be a marathon. So maybe we should do something small every day. Yeah. So that's kind of my unstructured thoughts and feelings at the moment.
Thank you, Anna. Olia?
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Michele and Alexei, and Asrin and Emily for inviting us. My name is Olia Sosnovska. I'm an artist and researcher, and also a member of a few groups. Among Problem Collective, I'm also a member of Work Hard, Play Hard group, together with Alexei, Nikolai, and Dina Zhuk. And I'm also doing now practice-based PhD project on the political dimensions of collective dance and movement practices in the post-socialist context, with a focus on festivity. So, of course, I'm living everything what is happening now in Belarus, both very close privately, but also with all these perspectives of my professional work, so to say, which is a bit of a strange position I'm finding myself. Now, geographically, I'm in Belarus, but also I haven't been here for the whole time, and that is why I find myself in some kind of a gap too, where I'm both part of the ongoing events, but not completely or not enough, and also a bit too late. And politically, I'm on the left, and I'm both full of hopes, but also pessimism. And right now is a bit of a complicated moment in a different way than it was complicated before. That after all those very intense and very strong dramatic events which were coming on a high speed and high intensity, now still it is a lot of the things going on, and it's still very hard emotionally, but also it feels like it's time for some not just immediate reactions, but more of some thoughtful reflections, for example, in terms of artistic work. But it is still very hard to produce them because still it's a lot of information coming, and also there is a lot of pressure on our friends and colleagues and on people in Belarus in general. And if in August there were a lot of actions of different groups, now it is becoming more and more unsafe to have any public activity, because if one follows the news from Belarus, a lot of activists have been detained, and in particular female activists. But still the protests are going on, and I like the question about the temporality of the protests, and I think one of the temporalities is every day, which relates to what Anna said, that the everyday should become revolutionary, but also there are so many different protest actions every day which often also are not visible. And apart from the temporality of now, I think the future is very important, because it is really important to think what is that we want to become. And a part of those basic demands which Alexei mentioned, resignation of the government, release of all political prisoners, stopping the violence and punishing all the people responsible for the violence. There are also other demands which are important to vocalize, but also very complicated to vocalize. Personally, I haven't been on strike because also I was not in Belarus, so I don't know if it was very useful. But if to consider the fact that since early August I was not able to work and to do anything basically that is not related to the events in Belarus, then maybe yes, I was on strike and I am on strike. And another interesting issue which was brought to us and suggested to discuss is what are the important forms of protests. And I think that in particular strikes and different forms of interruption are very important. And among those, what I consider to be interruptions, there are many blockades of the roads, which is done both by people, pedestrians, who block the movement of the cars, but also the cars themselves sometimes create traffic jams. And also people who take part in this really huge marches, they're also blocking basically the infrastructure of the city, but also people are trying to sabotage the work of state institutions. So if we think about interruption in general, there are many ways which people, in which it operates as a way of protest. Also, there are many vocal practices, for example, collective singing, there are protest choirs, also on women marches in particular, women sang many times when they've been encircled by the riot police, and also there was screaming, which was also very powerful. And also all the chants which people create and which become really shared and popular chants and demands. These are also something very particular, I think. And the drums and the samba, which sounds very often, and also in this self-organized yards or neighborhoods, which Alexei already mentioned, there are often concerts of different bands or choirs or singers. And basically, this can be seen as creation of some parallel institution, which is not part of the official state cultural institution. And also apart from the marches, I think the very fact of this very diverse solidarity and support is also a very important part of protest. And speaking about spaces of the protest, I think Andrei will give a more detailed insight. But for me, the striking, and in particular in this ongoing uprising, is that not the only city center is being occupied by the protest, but rather actually different decentralized parts of the city, and the protest is actually fluctuating between them. It's not stable. It emerges at some part of the city and then it might disappear. And also it happens in semi-public spaces, like on the balconies or in the windows, where people put flags, for example. But also it is in our bodies, in the everyday. And the words that I normally use when I speak about what is happening in Belarus is more and more often not protest but uprising, because it is really something which is omnipresent and so general. But also I think things that are very important is this celebratory moment of these small festivals happening in the arts, but also the Sunday March, which becomes a celebration with music, with chants, with the creativity of posters, and on the other hand, the morning, because actually this huge wave of protests in early August after elections started when people were shocked by the extreme state and police violence. And I think we're still going through this collective mourning process. And one particular important space in the city is this Pushkinskaya metro station, when one of the protesters, Alexander Tarakovsky, was killed, where people create self-organized memorial, and which the state constantly tries to erase, and then it appears again. Mm-hmm. Yes, so I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alia. So, Nikolai.
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we don't hear you that well. Could you speak closer to the mic or something?
Yeah, of course. I hope it's better now. Yeah, my name is Nikolai Spisivtsev. I'm a part of different collectives. One of them is EEFFF, and another one is working group of annual event taking part in Minsk, as Ole and Losha said, called Work Hard, Play Hard. And I'm based between Moscow and Minsk, and during the election time, I was in Moscow and had the possibility to go to Minsk because of the precarious specificity of my ways of earning money for living, and during the August and the beginning of September, I had a kind of distributed or distant mode of participating in events in Belarus, in the or protest or as Ola said, uprising events. And when I came to Minsk, and now in Minsk, I start following the situation when it's impossible to say that there is only one way to grasp the protests, and there is no way to say this is only one right way to do things. And following Anna's idea about revolutionization of everyday life, I would like to say that now it's interesting to have an optics to think about situation in Belarus when people who involved into the protests are not only protesters or activists, but it's interesting to think about the in terms of being involved into the different machines or processes that are making different types of institutions, of new types of solidarity that are producing solidarity. For example, somebody can be at the same time a protester on the streets representing not governmental type of thoughts, for example, in through her body, or at the same time, this person could be a programmer who is writing the code of some sort of digital infrastructure of solidarity, and at the same time, this person could be an actor in or lecturer in events that are taking place in backyards in the city. And for me, it's interesting to think about this complexity of this porous space of the protest or the uprising. And a bit later, I would like to talk about these possibilities and difficulties of importance the IT sector and IT workers in Belarusian protests now. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. Thank you. So we have Andrei, you're last.
So welcome to everyone, and thanks for the invitation. A few words about me. I have background in social sciences, and after finishing university in Lithuania, I returned to Belarus and have participated in the very beginning of Minsk Urban Platform initiative. So currently I'm working there, and our field of interest is bottom-up participation and informal education. Definitely in the field of urban studies and covering some pressing urban issues in nowadays Belarusian cities. We have done several projects in strengthening of local communities several years ago already, and engaging these local communities into design process that would help to develop their neighborhoods. Together with neighbors, we have created several small-scale urban interventions and designed development plans. Also, we do organize summer school seminars on personal urban issues in Minsk and other Belarusian cities. So that's the background. And this year, together with hundreds of thousands of Belarusians, I participated in protests already at the day of elections, so the first day of intense protests, because the protests themselves, they started already in the spring, but these first movements of high scale, they happened on the 9th of August. So already at that day, I was arrested. Basically kidnapped during the night in the middle of an empty street in Minsk. It was already after the protests had finished, so it was something like 2 or 3 o'clock, and I was far from the centers of protests because there were several of them. I was jailed for 3 days, and without having a court session, I was released. So actually, I don't know what was the purpose of me being detained for 3 days, but however, it's unfortunately it's already a normal practice in Belarus, so we just got somehow used to it. The following months, I've continued to participate in March. I was at the first meeting of my neighborhood. I live in an industrial periphery. It's called Angarska. It has the prevalence of factory workers there because of Minsk tractor works, Minsk automobile plant, and several other factories are located nearby. And at the same time, I was highly impressed by how widely people supported our very first neighborhood march in Angarska. So first of all, I couldn't imagine something, any kind of political event happening in our neighborhood, but it was there, and the people did greeted us from their windows, they waving white, red, white flags, with beating cars, and with some passers-by during our march. So for me, it was an indicator that okay, so working class is supporting us, is supporting this protest, and yeah, that was very nice to feel this support from the middle of your neighborhood. However, after the first wave of arrests that covered NGO activists, which happened in the beginning of September, they were followed with politically motivated financial police raids on NGO organizations. Our team decided to leave Belarus for a while, and now we are located in Kyiv, in Ukraine. So we were, so we are like very, you have a very pleasant company here, and we were kindly invited by local organizations. So this was also some kind of international solidarity support for us. And yeah, first months for us was emotionally very turbulent. And it took us very long to come back to work, so it was also our kind of strike, though not only the only one. Now I feel myself as good as possible, but considering the fact that almost each day one friend of mine gets into prison in Minsk, so you can imagine. The protest is still in my daily routine, so I somehow got it into the routine like the very first days. Even before the day of elections, I participated in initiative group of Viktor Babarika, which was one of the presidential candidates and who is now in prison. And for me, it was also at that point sociological interest, because I wanted to sit in the middle of the street somewhere in Angarska and to listen to what people are saying about politics. It was, I think it was May, April, something like this. And yeah, already then I was impressed how people actually hate Lukashenko, because I heard so much rude words about him, and it was happening in the middle of the street, in the middle of the day. So people already at that point were not afraid to say what they think. And yeah, and now this protest routine continues here in Kyiv. I helped to moderate an NGO chat in Telegram, where there are a lot of NGO representatives. Like there were 200 of them, but at some point the leader of this chat was arrested, and not the leader, but the formal owner of the chat. So we decided to remove the chat because it was not really safe for the participants, and we didn't manage yet to recreate it. So now it's around 60 people there. It's just the mechanism of the protest, how it looks from the inside. And yeah, occasionally I have helped people to temporarily relocate from Belarus. because there are those activists who need to have some time in a safe space, not only because they are under pressure, under personal pressure, but also because of mental health issues, and it's important to stay somewhere and safe. And also, I participate in some of the marches happening here in Kyiv, for Belarusians March. An interesting thing is that sometimes these marches are appropriated by right-wing activists in Ukraine, and and you don't really know the organizers of those marches, so you could be in trouble to join a right-wing march, and so you should take care about that here in Ukraine. So it looks quite differently that the march happening in Minsk. Yeah, something about our work. Tell me if I'm talking too much. Okay, so with our work, it's very complicated, not because of our relocation actually, but more because of political turbulence in Belarus. After we became institutionalized in Belarus several years ago, we have started to work with various governmental institutions, starting from urban design centers to municipality. And this way we thought to make our work with neighbors more visible on a city level and to create more ambitious projects. However, local authorities did ban the realization of our participatory project in Srebranka, one of Minsk neighborhoods, a year ago. And till this year, the only way of cooperation that remained between us and state institutions was in the framework of yearly conference. So it was an informal education, a cooperation in the field of informal education. And now we are in the process of rethinking how we could go further with it, because the way we initially planned the conference, that will include decision makers, governmental decision makers, and local administration representatives, won't work. First of all, they won't come, and secondly, they lost any legitimacy, so we don't want to have them and work for them. To invite them is some kind of recognition, and we would like to avoid it. So we reconfigure the way that we could follow somehow the protest line, and at the same time to stay in our specific object of interest in the city, and not to risk with those people and organization members who decided to stay in Minsk, because only a part of our team is relocated right now. And yeah, I just briefly outline my thoughts about what is really important in Belarusian protests right now. So I think that at the first point, it's the consolidation of society, because probably the most important change happened during the protests are marches on Mondays, on Sundays, Saturdays, Mondays, and yeah, probably also Thursday, because today it was the first march of people with disabilities that happened in Minsk. On Mondays, there are seniors marching in the streets, which is very impressive. On Saturdays, there's Women March, that includes also a feminist group. And on Sunday, it's General March, so the biggest one. And at the very beginning of the protest, columns of factory workers from my neighborhood also, so from Minsk Tractor Works, from Minsk Automobile Plant, they did join the General March. However, it doesn't happen right now, so the workers are not so visible in the general protest. And at some point, there were also columns of neighborhoods under their flags they have designed recently. Yeah, so I mentioned just several social groups, and this is just a part of protest spectrum that I mentioned. So actually, it's more various. The second point I find important is the rise of self-organization. It includes not only marches, but also various neighborhood activities, establishment of numerous support foundations, and very successful donation campaigns. This funding aims firstly on those who have retired from work, either from factories or from police, for instance. So the society provides help for them in order to somehow make solidarity support. Another thing I think is very important is women participating in politics. We have women leaders right now in Belarus, and we have elected Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as our president on these elections. Women are widely participating in marches, and yeah, there is feminist agenda at the slogans and in the air of the protest. As one of the consequences of this gains of protest is street appropriation, and the possibility to gather in the street and at the main square whenever we want without getting permission from local authorities, because actually according to bills and legislation we need it, and now there's problems with Belarusian legislation because no one from the state follows it, and as well as the protesters. So it's part of social agreement somehow.
Andre, we need to
just stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can continue discussing many issues from what all of you mentioned later. So now we would have a round of maybe a little bit more specific questions. So Andre, also and others, you can unfold a little bit longer here. So let's have this round, and then also if you have, let's keep it maybe a little bit more, since now a little bit more dynamic. So maybe if you would make a little bit shorter statements, and then also you're welcome to comment on each other statements. So we prepared a little bit more specific questions to everyone from you, but also please share your thoughts and ideas, because of course it's very natural that you are taking part in so many different activities and having so many different thoughts. So I would like to, actually it's also important, Andre, that you mentioned the way how actually women organized during the protest, being one of the most important forces during the protest. And I would address my first question to Anna, and actually we would like to ask you if you can briefly tell us how queer festival Dotyk is actually operating at the moment. We know that it was planned for the August, just in the time after the elections, but it has not happened, but it's transformed into something. So maybe you can say a few words in the way how it is transformed and how it is operating at the moment now. And also, if you can also give us your perspective on the these women's marches, if you can really call them feminist, and what was actually the main ambitions, main role of queer column during the women's marches, because it was also very visible and very important force.
Yeah, so we were planning to have the Dotyk Festival, which is a queer culture festival, at the end of August, and we were joking afterwards, like why would we think that it was okay? Because even in July, everyone understood already that this election won't just go as usual. Like Lukashenko again fake the votes, and then something will have to happen, because people were not going to let it slide like all the other times. Yeah, so like we announced the festival at the beginning of August, and then once the protest started, of course we had to reschedule, and there were two main reasons why we had to reschedule. One was the safety of the visitors and the team as well, because we thought that given the political situation in Belarus, something such as a queer festival and festival talking about issues that are social and political in its nature would attract a lot of attention from the government, and maybe there will be some repressions that the government will impose on the team and on the visitors. So for that reason, we decided to postpone the festival. But for me, for example, I can't speak for the whole team, but for me, for example, the second reason was much more important. It didn't feel right to just have an event just as planned when there were so many things happening in Belarus and so many really unexpected things, especially the violence that happened in the first days of the protest, and that is actually happening now again. So it felt like we can't just have the queer festivals. Usually, even though the festival, like the queer perspective, is political in its essence, and yet still we wanted to respond to the events that were happening right now, not to some broader issues. So yeah, as Lyosha mentioned, the festival was transformed into something else. For me, as a queer activist, it was really important to figure out how to use Dotik and how to use my activism as a queer activist in this protest movement. How could we help? And I think the notion of solidarity is very important here because on one hand, queer people are a part of this protest. They are participating actively in the protest. They're going to the streets, they're volunteering, they're doing everything what other people are doing, like heteronormative people are doing. And on the other hand, the protest doesn't have any clear queer demands or goals, and yet still we wanted to contribute in some way. For Dotik, this resulted in a project which is called Dotik of Solidarity or Touch of Solidarity, if you translate it from Belarusian, where we organized a series of events that could support the protesters, from law trainings to art therapy and psychological support, and just getting together and talking to the community and stuff like that. And also I saw my role as a queer person in Belarus was to speak out internationally about the protests in Belarus, and especially the condition of queer people protesting in Belarus. And it was really nice that actually my foreign friends, queer friends, reached out first and asked me to participate in some talks or give interviews. And then there were more and more people who were interested in this topic. So that was a really nice action of, once again, international solidarity, which Andrei mentioned already. Regarding the women's marches and women movement in Belarus, I understand that everyone has their own perspective, and I think everyone here will answer differently, but I don't see protests in Belarus as feminist, for the sole reason that there are no feminist demands made in Belarus. We could count an anti-violence perspective as a feminist one, yet for me it's not enough to call the protest feminist. But there are a lot of women, and I would say that women are at the forefront of the protest. There are a lot of political figures that are women and which are showed immense courage and strength in this protest. And the women marches itself are very a very huge symbol of the women's involvement. But also the reason why women's marches started, it was that I think in August, women thought that it felt like if women came out during the day on the street, they were a bit more protected than men who came out in the evening, or maybe the protesters, because not all of them were men. But yeah, the first few women marches were kind of like using your own vulnerability and your own fragility to feel more protected, which is also a very interesting concept. And regarding the queer bloc during the Women's March, it was a very sudden idea to organize some kind of a queer bloc, which came from like the grassroots, the most grassroots of the grassroots people and activists. It was not like initiative of some organization. I wouldn't say like it was a DOTEC initiative or some other LGBTQ organization in Belarus. And the queer people organized it themselves, and I was a part of it. We started with the Women's March, and the goal was to show that queer people are also there. They are also participating in the uprising, and they are also fighting for the same goals as all the other protesters. And there were some really nice placards at the queer bloc that said like that homophobia, for example, homophobia is a trait of an authoritative government, is always a trait of an authoritative government, which is the sentiment that I completely agree with. And during the Women's March, we felt really safe. Like there were some expectations that we will face some homophobia from the protesters themselves, not just like the pressure from the police. But I myself didn't face and didn't see any of homophobia directed at the queer bloc. But after the Women's March, or during the main march on Sunday, there were some comments and some looks and some, I don't know, slurs thrown in the direction of queer bloc. And there was a big discussion on the internet about rainbow flags at the protest, because people thought, like some people, of course, you can't say when it's in the comments on the internet, you can't actually say how many people share this sentiment, but some people said that like queer people, or rather LGBTQ people, are trying to, I don't know, hijack the protest and make it all about themselves, which is interesting because I didn't hear this from about any other social group, not about the, I don't know, women or like doctors or any other social group that marked them as a group and came out to the protest. Yeah, and after this, the queer bloc actually decided to maybe ease on the rainbow flags and use some other tactics and strategies, mainly placards, and we also dressed in the clothes that would make up a rainbow when we all walked together. Yeah, and one of the placards said that like, we are ready to take away the flags if you want us to, but are you ready to fight homophobia with us when the like the dictatorship is over? Yeah, so for me, still, that was a strong moment of solidarity. And although I talked about the negative feedback here, I think that mostly the feedback was very positive. And I personally hope that maybe some people even changed their views a little bit and became less homophobic because they saw that we are all fighting the same fight. Yeah, so for me, it was more of a positive experience. And I think it was, I don't regret that we did this queer bloc. Yeah, and also I wanted to, that's going a little bit off topic, but I wanted to say something about the leaders of the protest, so-called. Like, for example, Andrei mentioned that he was working in one of the working group of the candidates. I feel like this Belarus had a very unique situation right from the start of like election campaign of the candidates that were not in jail. because the main candidate, Tikhanovskaya, openly said that she's not going to be the president. And all the protests and all the movements in the yards and the road blockage and everything else happened without the direct support or even like the mention at the very beginning, the mention or the encouragement of so-called the leaders of the protest for Tikhanovskaya. So I think it's a very unique, it's not unique maybe, but a very interesting situation that Belarus doesn't have a leader currently because Lukashenko was not elected, and Tikhanovskaya.
We lost her. Alexei?
Yes, I don't hear Anna, so we wait until she reconnects.
Yeah. Maybe we should continue and perhaps have a more dynamic question-answer situation. So we could continue with, you had a question to Olya?
I think, yeah, maybe now we can go back a little bit back to the notion of strike and to unfold it maybe from different perspectives. And maybe Olya can give us a short insight into what was happening in the cultural field. As a cultural worker, you and many collectives you're part in been following the strikes in the cultural field, and I think that they were also quite special in Belarus because we haven't seen something like that before. So maybe you can give us an idea of what has happened in the cultural field.
Normally in Belarus, art and cultural field is seen as being divided into official and non-official, which is the cultural and art institutions funded and supported by the state, and those which are either totally self-organized and funded or privately funded. And there always been such a divide. State official institutions were normally going like in line mostly with the government. They had a lot of censorship and really bad working conditions, but also normally do the unofficial ones. I mean, about working conditions. But this time it was very surprising to find these two fields kind of united in the protest. It was very, very striking that official art institutions actually not only went on strike, but also took part in different protests and walkouts. For example, the National Art Museum or the Philharmonic Society, which like the choir which worked in this Philharmonic, they were singing in front of the building. And now I'm not sure if it's this completely the same people or also more mixed group. There is this choir which sings protest songs in different buildings and public spaces across the city. Also, the oldest theater in Belarus, Kupalsky Theater, it's most of its company resigned as a protest against the firing of its director, Latushka, who is member of the coordinating council. So now basically this theater, which is actually this year 100 years old, is not functioning. And the company formed its alternative, like an alternative company, and they play performances in the yards or online. This is very interesting situation when I think as a freelance artist or as independent artist, you are joining maybe the general protest as a professional, but maybe more like an individual. But as a professional, you're not so visible to the state, and thus maybe you're not so dangerous. But these strikes of or protests of state institutions actually felt much more effective for the state, and I think it was really important to support them for us, for independent cultural workers. And also, what is very interesting now is this artistic and cultural events which are happening in the yards. And basically, we may say that people are organizing the alternative Ministry of Culture, because they're also inviting the musicians they want to invite, they're collecting money for them. And this is something also very unexpected. And also breaking the stereotypes about the independent artistic field as being more political. Maybe it is more political in the way how it works, or maybe in the works they produce. But now I think the most important political events are happening not there. And also, if speaking about if to speak about the protest itself, I think the creativity of the people who create these slogans and posters and different ways of resistance is much more powerful than any artistic production.
Thank you.
So I will maybe also pose a kind of similar question to Nikolai now, regarding, we know that you've been also doing some research on the way how strikes were organized, and also the role of different technologies here now in Belarus. So maybe also into the regards of possibilities of, like, let's say, more classical strikes from the industrial sector, where something similar happening in the IT sphere, which Belarus was quite famous for last at least 10 and maybe more years, because of the lot of non-material labor produced in the information technology sphere. So maybe you can also give us a short insight on what has happened there since few months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is the difference between these elections and, for example, the previous one? Is that the media sphere and the machines of cultural machines of connection people together are quite different. And for example, during last elections, almost media activity was circulating around more classical forms of media, but now the importance of well-distributed technologies are rising, and during past months a lot of activity shifted to, for example, Telegram as technology. And I just checked that the initial release of this software was in 2013. It's quite new thing, and for me, from my point of view, it's important to think or to think about this distributed nature of or character of this technology as a machine of a new type of institutions, or creating of these institutions. As for example, Ola said about these yards and activity in the yards, and now it's possible to connect all the yards together to make this new temporality of the protest. And it is possible only because of having such kind of distributed technologies.
But can you please maybe can you mention like what makes it special? Why, for example, we know that many protests were organized because of Twitter or other types of social networks. So maybe just briefly, you can give us an idea why specifically Telegram or what kind of.
Yeah, thank you for your good question. I think the difference between, for example, Twitter and these semi-public, private types of communication is that Twitter, from my point of view, it's a media technology, but the tools that are used by people in Belarus the past months are not providing this media at first place. It's important that it could construct some publicity, but at the same time it could construct some intimacy. You can make borders, but you can make something open. And during these months, people are playing with these tools as machines to create some sort of safe zones or different types of porous public spaces, which are machines to construct these temporalities of the protest and specialities of this protest. For example, you can organize somehow safe zones of organizing this blockage of the streets in one separate space, but you can provide some more safe information for a broader audience in different space, in different, for example, chat. And people being connected to different chats could use, grasp the situation in the city in a whole, using this information as, for example, as navigation through safe zones, avoiding police attacks, or you can use this as a tool to organize something on your yard on your own at the same time. And all of the the degree of publicity or degree of being involved in this process you can choose using this digital infrastructure. And I think
so basically it's
yeah. Yeah, please.
So this is basically one of the reasons why the state shut down mobile internet every Sunday in Belarus. Is it correct?
I think, yeah, maybe in the very beginning, the idea was to shut down all the media, but of course the idea is to shut down the communication process between people, to reduce it to the only very understandable for the government, the process of being represented on the streets. And the police knows how to deal with these practices of representation, but it's for them it's difficult to deal or to cope these practices of creating new institutions, for example, in yards. And I think I want to stress that now for me the importance of these digital technologies is not in spreading the information as a media tool, but more it's about creating new types of infrastructure for different types of care or solidarity.
Okay, thank you, Alexei. We have I think we should go into the last interaction and then open up for the audience questions. And now we have in time wise we are at 7:22, so we're 20 past 7. So
maybe we can ask if I would like to ask, so we have a little bit more than half an hour, so maybe if it's fine with everyone, we can not have a break but just go on discussing for half an hour more. I don't think it's very long time. I'm personally fine. So, and then then if it's fine with everyone, maybe we can ask last question to Andrei, like a little bit more specific, and then open up. I believe that we have some questions, right, from the great. So so then also I think we'll continue in actually the same topics over and over, and we've been talking about yards. So maybe Andre, you can give us a little bit of insight, elaborate a little bit on how actually this solidarity is possible in something which in Russian or Belarusian would call dvory, as a yard, as a kind of as a very specific post-socialist configuration of the way how people live, and what made it possible, what activated this kind of solidarity, how it actually works. Maybe you can give us a little bit of idea. And you mentioned also that actually all of you mentioned that the protests are really decentralized, that there is no one particular place where everything is happening, but it's happening actually in different yards all over Belarus. So maybe you can give us an idea what is happening.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, we have talked a lot about yards, but never explained what is actually the process going there. And it's super unique for socialist context, I guess. And yeah, I just briefly outline how the local neighborhoods appeared very influential in the process and very visible in the process itself. So I guess the turning point when neighborhood activities started to gain popularity among Minskers was a particular case of one yard. Now it has a name of the Yard of Change, where neighbors pasted an image of two DJs who had turned a late Soviet track by Viktor Tsoi called Change. It's one of the protest tracks. And they have done it during one of the pro-governmental events before the elections. However, a protest public did gathered on this event, so it was for this public. So they were immediately arrested, and yeah, but somehow they have become very popular since that moment. So it was the image of them pasted on the wall in this yard. And there was a long-lasting struggle around this image because state authorities have tried a lot of times to get rid of it, and the protesters, the yard dwellers, they did every time restore this image. And so this is how this yard became very well known in the media, in the public, and some other neighborhoods they have started to do similar things, and other local communities were formed this way, started a protest competition. So who will design the best neighborhood flag, or who will hang the largest number of white, red, white flags in the yards, in between buildings, and where there will be the best outdoor concert or lecture of public intellectual. So all of these kind of activities is happening right now in the yards, and it's totally bottom up. So in rare cases, some local organizations like the unions of those who own a flat in the same building to support this, but basically it's also a bottom-up organization. So yeah, it's important for the protest decentralization. And yeah, another reason for these decentralized protest activities to appear is the idea that it's basically safer to gather in many different spots simultaneously rather than in one spot at the same time. Yeah, because all those marches happening in the central part of the street, so you could be beaten there, you could be taken by police, you can be arrested, and so on. And it seems to be a bit more complicated for police to manage all those activities happening in neighborhoods and the periphery at the same time. So there are just a bit too much of the spots to surrender. And the police has troubles to handle this. So this way, also local marches have appeared. I was participating in one of these marches, and yeah, in an important development that so I basically think that it's maybe the most important urban innovation that has happened during this protest. These local communities that are organized also by Telegram, so by these public spaces, but also they do meet themselves in the real spaces in neighborhoods, and they are trying to start to institutionalize some of these local initiatives, local neighborhoods, in a legal form, which is possible according to Belarusian legislation. It could make these communities more sustainable and influential in the nearest future when the protests will finally win. But we will see the results of these attempts soon, but I'm quite sure that the Belarusian state won't permit these organizations to appear. So it's more about the idea how they could develop in the future, and I hope that we won't lose all this bottom-up power of neighborhoods that is now rising in Minsk.
Thank you. So, thanks for bearing with us and listening in. Are there any spontaneous or well-thought questions here locally in the room? Don't be shy. Anything is. I have some question regarding these yards. Is it structurally or in the urban planning, have these yards always been important for social or political mobilization, or this a spontaneous activity that just happened this time around? Because there have been protests against Lukashenko many times, but is this kind of unique for these recent events?
Yeah, I guess the question is for me, yeah?
Uh-huh.
Yes. So it's the first time local communities are playing such an important role, so it's really a new thing for Belarus. Mm-hmm. And I won't say that it's something unpredictable, because as far as we have worked with yard communities for several years before, we have already understood that these local organizations, so the organizations of homeowners, they could play basically an important role in democratic protests, because we have visited one of the events organized by this homeowners cooperative, yeah, there was a decision to make about their yard development, and we were invited as a team who could design actually this process and design the plan of the development. And there was a democratic voting whether they will need to finance this process or not. So the organization representative themselves, they really wanted it, but the citizens decided that okay, they are not really ready. And we face how this democratic process has functioned on this very local level, and it was great, as for me. And they are also these yard communities, some of them, they have also the possibilities to grab financial resources for their work. So there was this very important basis for at least some yard communities to unite and to get to know each other, and this potential was somehow transformed during these protests, and they have become the driving force at some point. This story I told, it's not a common story, so it's just so we have several stories like these, but they made an image how yard community should look like, and many are starting to follow them.
And just to sort of zoom out a bit for the history of Belarus, So Lukashenko has been in power for 26 years, right? And is the main, I mean, he was at the time when he came into power, if I understand correctly, also some form of reformist compared to the old Soviet rule, but quickly turned into something else? Or how is sort of Lukashenko understood in the public opinion? Of course, he's a dictator, he's not very popular, that's been very clear, but what is the kind of main narrative on his role and his history, and why is he still hanging on to power, do you think? Very basic questions.
I think he was kind of a soft transition from the Soviet Union to an independent state. He also promised some sort of financial stability and social security, and there is a myth that Belarus is a social state, and we do have some remnants of that, like free medicine, but it's basically not free because it is not, free medicine is not really available, and also often of not very good quality. So many people actually still prefer private medical centers. Just one example. But he is holding on mainly thanks to Russian support, which also is not new. And I think without that, the system would have collapsed much earlier.
So in the context, because you also voiced the desire for a general strike, and if we look at the recent history with Russian intervention in, for example, in Ukraine, how would you sort of, what are your ideas of a future scenario? I mean, if we escalate in the scenario of an escalation of the uprising and protests, what would be actually the response from Russia, do you think? Or what is the response already? Anyone?
I can start. I think that I can like give you a chronology of Russia's response to the recent protest. At the start, and even before the elections, when most of the candidates were imprisoned, Russia was incredibly neutral, I feel like, in its coverage of the Belarusian political situation. Then there was this weird situation with the Russian private army found in Belarus, and they were also imprisoned and then released and sent back to Russia. When Lukashenko was trying to like create a foreign enemy to like be scared of and unite people, I guess. And now Russia is like the only partner Belarus, like to give you a bit of context, and I don't know, maybe it's common knowledge for Swedish people and for everyone listening, but Belarus is kind of balancing between Europe and Russia in its political preferences, let's say that. So we are incredibly dependent on Russia economically, but still Lukashenko was always trying to be nice to both sides and like not to make it like a two-sided issue, but be nice with Europe and be nice with Russia as well. And at this point, like, I don't know, all the relationship with Western Europe are in shambles, I would say. Like the diplomats went out of the country for a council with the respective governments, and Russia is like one of the few countries that actively supports Lukashenko's presidency right now. So there is that. As for the future, like for me, it's hard to say maybe Pole is one living in Moscow could say a couple of words of what it's like to just be in Moscow right now and like talk about Belarusian just with some Russian people. But yeah, like I don't want to be mystic, so I don't want to think of the future where Russia invades Belarus or tries to integrate it in some way. But actually, one thing that I didn't mention is that there is a huge issue with a close integration with Russia right now. It started like around last year when they were supposed to sign some agreements, economical agreements that would make Belarus more dependent on Russia and um, would introduce some common elements in like authority and administration of different processes in Belarus and Russia. And like integration is still a very important issue.
माइक रॉकेट गया
And
ताकि
I
करीब
think
नहीं
that
रखो
on both sides,
कोशिश
on
यही
the
है कि आवाज
Russian side, logically,
बिखरा
on the
ना हो
side
और
that
क्लियर रहे
Lukashenko
हाँ
for some reason,
अच्छा ठीक है
I think most
ठीक
people agree
है
that
ठीक है ना
they don't
हाँ
want to be a part of
सिर्फ
that.
ये जिला
They
गल
don't
कर दो
want
थोड़ी जी जरा
integration.
हाँ हाँ क्लियर क्लियर
क्लियर क्लियर तो ऊंचा करे थोड़ा बहुत ज्यादा नहीं लेकिन नॉर्मल जिस तरह थोड़ा
The most probable one is not actually
ए
Russia
ओ
invading the army, but just
शिकायत
maybe
की कोर में
privatizing
प्रोग्राम
the
वीकली
industry.
हिस्सा लेना
They
है
don't need
बर्मिंघम में है
they are
अपने एक्स मतलब
It's
है
already
कुलीग
quite
यूनिवर्सिटियों
actually
ने
because there were some
लेफ्ट में वो
or
मुख्तलिफ मौजूदात है एक
there were
ऐसी कि
already
कश्मीर
some
प्रोग्राम में क्या
factories sold
कि
to
मौजूदा सूरत
Russian
हाल की
businessmen
पुलिस वो
to the
भी मैं
protest.
पिछले दो से
So
मैं सी
the protest
कह
was
लो कि
already
Yeah, I just want to add that there are different types of these relations. I don't want to say that the only the most horrible is military invasion into the on the territory and some sort of occupying,
yeah
as we have in the Ukraine now.
बहरहाल
But
गुजारिश है
as Anya said, now there
टाइम अप
are
हुई
a
है
lot of
एक
evidences
थोड़ा
of
करो
presence
करो
of Russian
इंसान
group
कि
with
थोड़ा
capital
सा
in Belarus.
एक तज्जियाती प्रोग्राम
And now
रखो
we are talking about
कि
this
आसानी सारी की स्ट्रगल हुई है
new type
इतना
of
महासर जरा मेरे नजदीक एक आसानी आजादी की सोच
specialization of the city. For
नाइट
example,
पार्टी आपस
through the
में
processes on the yards,
इकट्ठा ना होना
but people
मतलब
are going from yard to yard,
लेकिन
for example, on the sharing bicycles, which are the project
मतलब
of
रियासत में
Russian
जेरी मुदाखलत
bank
बारू
called
हुई है
VTB.
मेरे
And this
नजदीक
is
तो ये हद हुई है और
the
खासकर
evidence of
ऐसा मकबूल बात
this deep
नहीं क्या
integration,
कुर्बानी
but not on this
जस्टिफाई ना कर सकते हैं अगर उन्होंने
root
वो
violent
प्रोग्राम
level, but
आसानी
more a
स्ट्रगल
kind
होती
of soft power.
क्या हम
And I think a lot of processes will be in such way.
रिलायंस और ਉਹ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੈ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ
Any questions?
ਔਰ ਉਹ ਮੇਰੇ ਅਸਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਮੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਹੈ ਕਹ ਲੋ ਕਿ ਐਵੀਡੈਂਸ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ
Question from
ਯਾਦਾਸ਼ਤਾਂ
Facebook.
ਸਾਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਬੰਦ
From
ਹੋਈ
the chat.
ਅਸਾਂ ਕੀ ਬੁਲਾਣੇ ਦੇ ਬ੍ਰਿਗੇਡੀਅਰ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੇ 60 ਵਿੱਚ
Especially difficult for artists to find a way to support strike and show solidarity by means of art, because it looks somewhat pale or even irrelevant in comparison to wider workers and people's struggle.
Did you follow? Did you hear? Can we maybe we can post it in the Zoom? I don't see it actually in the Facebook, but if you read it here, yeah.
So the question is, do you think that in this current situation it is especially difficult for artists to find a way to support strike and show solidarity by means of art, because it looks somewhat pale or even irrelevant in comparison to wider workers and people's struggle? Did you hear the question?
So
maybe you can say also a few words about your practices as artists, for example, on what you've been kind of involved or working on, but also
So, I mean, Olja, and you have already been touching on this question, I would say, the role of art. Would you like to expand a bit?
Yeah, I'm not the only artist here, so maybe others can join. Yeah, I think it's not irrelevant, and in general, any support is very important. And I think there are also different channels of supporting. For example, maybe now the international one is safer because doing anything inside the country is becoming more and more dangerous. And the example is the imprisonment of Nadia Sayapina, one of the artists who has been very active, and she also now left the country actually. I think it is important to also understand which media and which networks we can use to amplify the voices. Is it like the international art institutions who can make exhibitions or publish open letters or make statements? And maybe yeah, there have been many gestures in public space to support the workers on strike. For example, different murals on the walls or videos. And but what I think artists maybe artistic work is now maybe more important is to work on this political imagination, which is very important and which is very different from this now everyday temporality, when you have when the effect is very strong, but you don't have the energy to actually think further than today or tomorrow. And then this critical thinking, and also the possibility to imagine other ways of doing things, and of ways how to sustain this collective protest and collectivity and solidarity in general. This is when this maybe perspective of and capacities of contemporary art would be very useful. And I'm sure more of these things will be coming now after like 2 months of this quite exhausting protest.
Yeah, I would like to add from my point of view, from my practice as an artist who is working with different types of collective situations that are open-ended, and I'm working with different types of real playing games. And I think that the role of artistic practice in this situation now is not only to show the solidarity or to support, but somehow to construct different optics and different types of reflexivity that are important to organize the lacunes of doing things somehow otherwise, or to reshape the horizons of imagination. But for me, as I said, from my practice, it's important to do it collectively. And I think the knowledge that circulated in a sphere of contemporary art is very important in this situation, and it could be very useful. And yeah, I would like to stress that it's not only, we can not only to show, but somehow to reshape and reorganize.
Yeah, I also think what is super precious now is that the contemporary art is not so condensed, or the circle of contemporary artists is not so enclosed, and now it's really the possibility of people of different competences and from different social groups to cooperate. And this is something which I was really missing in Minsk cultural field, or in general. Any artist actually could just go and join the local chat and create the agenda, or any other cultural worker give lectures or create like some program, and then everyone is so open to cooperate. You could suggest, I don't know, like people from all the different competencies, hello, let's do something together and join our energies, and people would be more open than ever to do so.
And I also wanted to add one little story. So after the protest started, but before we decided to postpone the festival, we were visiting one of the locations, which is an art museum here in Minsk, which was on strike, by the way. They were doing the Italian strike where they are kind of working but don't. It was the Asgura Museum, if anyone wondering. And the director of the museum, when we were discussing what to do with the festival, said like the most important art that is happening right now is happening on the street. So there is no point in organizing like art events or cultural events, because everything is happening, and it's happening during the protest and on the protest. So yeah, just wanted to tell this little story.
It's interesting. So the strikes or refusals of different kinds open up a different temporality, and you already touched that in many ways. And I think there are many interesting historical connections, but also connections to other ongoing struggles around the world at the moment. So it's very exciting to hear you speak and present your experiences and give us this report on what is going on. Yes, we have a question. Yeah.
Great. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, please come forward. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a question which relates to that a bit, because a couple of you mentioned different kinds of sort of counter institutions that are sort of happening. I think you mentioned words like ways that sort of the protests or organizations within the protests are becoming a bit institutionalized, and maybe this alternative Ministry of Culture and things like that. So I was wondering, looking forward a bit, how you are, what your thoughts are about sort of like the possibilities and risks of these kinds of counter institutions, perhaps.
Maybe I can say some words about it. For me, it's not only counter institutions, but it is the real institutions which are organizing on the place which was empty last years because of highly verticalized power, the structure of the power inside of Belarus. And I think in a best case, they will be integrated into different type of the government, or I don't know, the federation of these social cells, or I don't know what I can imagine, because now it's a very exciting process of constructing this new tissue of sociality. And it is a very painful process now.
Anyone else who wants to respond to that? Questions of counter institutions?
Yeah, maybe the danger is that people are also learning to self-organize, even though there have been already examples of self-organization. It never happened on such a vast level, so of course it's very complicated. And actually people are learning very fast how to make decisions, how to agree, and even though there is a basic agreement on the fact that we don't want this government anymore and we don't want the police violence, there are a lot of conflicts on the other like things, like for example LGBTQ rights or race or nationalism or socialism, and there is also feels like there is no time to discuss those things, and often then urge to act feels more stronger than the necessity to actually think through and to self-educate. So actually I think a lot of self-education or education is necessary if we want to move to actually further institutionalization. So also this moment now I think is very precious because it's full of optimism, but we know that after, even if and especially if the state system will change, it will be a very painful and complicated and not so nice process anymore.
It's really interesting how you have to kind of mediate these different temporalities and specialities of change, basically. One with a certain urgent immediacy, but then that might be more generalizable, and then these specific struggles that have another history, but that also need to be accounted for or included in the struggles. It's really interesting.
Because I also would like to add a few words.
Yes.
Just saying that I think it's also, we talked a lot about temporality, but also a lot about scales. Mm-hmm. How actually to scale from the very local, from the very small scale to the high, like to the different levels of districts, cities, national representation, international representations. So I think it's actually also very complicated process of kind of negotiating many things, and then but it's also a lot of tests, because actually like this kind of construction of new institutions and new types of institutions happening everywhere. It's basically also like this is how the political situation actually is structured around the state, actually like the failed state which was not elected and which actually cancel so many laws which are not operating anymore, and also something which is called Coordination Council, which is a political body which includes many representatives of different groups, kind of with a Tikhanovskaya kind of as a main representative. But it's also actually very interesting to learn how it is organized, because it also has its own feminist part, and the way I don't think that I know a lot about it, but actually there are many different ways to organize, and actually this question of rescaling things and and actually learning how to organize, to self-organize, but also to perhaps it's a question of representation broadly. So if we really need this representation, because the previous political representations failed completely, there were different attempts actually to call out the deputies from the parliament because they were not representing us in any possible way. So actually to build and to think about the ways how we can construct any way of representing our demands, our desires, our wishes, and if we can really delegate them or not, and how it is possible. I think this is actually the way how people learn to do it. It's one of the most important and also one of the most complicated, but also very joyful parts of the situation that we have now in many cities.
Okay, thank you. Are there any last questions or comments or thoughts? I just want to mention that tomorrow we'll have a big demonstration here in Stockholm, also in solidarity with Belarus. And we are with you, and we will follow your work and your struggles, and stay with you in spirit. And sometimes hope to meet as well. And thank you very much.
I think as Andre...
Yes, please go ahead.
Just wanted to say that, as Andre already mentioned, it's super important actually to also like to have solidarity coming from different left-wing groups and people, because actually in many different ways post-socialist protests are neglected, and in a very weird, actually in very ignorant ways. And I think that it's very important to build up those connections, continue those discussions, and actually searching for so many different parallel histories with strikes, with different kind of struggles, etc. So I think that's very important. Thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you. So with that, and with your excellent interventions and wonderful reports, Alexei, thank you for moderating, and thank you all for your participation, and thank you our audience here at Mint in Stockholm. I'm very happy to have had this moment with you, and hope to be in touch soon again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.